again, thank you. And good afternoon for tuning in to our monthly market update. This month is a little different and it holds a little bit more weight. And that's simply because we're going to talk Q1 numbers as well as obviously what happened in March. And was March any different than February? And dive into things like that. So yeah, let's go right into this because it's go time. I started this thing last month called kind of key facts. And I like it because it's just kind of setting the tone for the context. So fact number one I want to talk about, again, this is something you'll read in any publication, is one, we are coming into the spring market with more inventory than we did last year. Now by a fair amount, right? There's a lot more coming. So that's simple fact number one. Fact number two is sales to date in 2018 really remain sluggish in comparison to recent years, and then also the long-term averages that, again, we like to compare ourselves to. And then third fact is, this is the good part, is we're entering the most active part of our year. So much of what has happened to date is just kind of is the practice round, in, give or take, for the regular season, which is coming right now, April, May, June. So those are the three facts that are going to just set us up for a bit of context for what I'm going to dive further into now. Now, one of the strongest indicators we talk about for how the pace of the market is doing is simply that supply-demand equation. And what that means is how many sales are we having in relation to the amount of inventory that's either on the market or has been ramping up into the market or coming up, right? So I'm going to queue up a graph quickly to just outline what I mean by that, and I'm going to pull it up here on my screen too. So yeah, big graph, lots of stuff. I usually wouldn't show this much stuff. I'm going to even move out of the way a little bit. But I've got sales on top and I got inventory below. And when I say supply demand, this is just a quick little graph to show kind of where we sit at present. Rounding out Q1, the top graph has this red line that I put in, and you can see where it falls is actually on the very low end of the spectrum. So sales are sitting on the low end of what we've seen all the way back to 2004. Now, if we look on the inventory graph, which is the one right below it, there's another red line there. And as you can see, it's right near the top. There's only 1 year in the last 14 that we've seen a higher inventory at this time of year. So when we look at supply and demand, you can see we have a lot of supply and so far not a lot showing as far as demand, meaning sales are truly transpiring. So that's the as is, that's what it is. Now let's talk a little bit more specifically around that. I'm going to dive into, I call it my summary chart. And Dave, you can probably, yeah, there you've got that one up there. So this summary chart is and I don't want you to look at all these numbers because there's too many, but the numbers that I want you to care about, I have highlighted with this red box. And I'm just opening it up so I can see it. Yeah, so this is simple. Our market's broken down into detached, apartment, and attached. Pretty simple. Now I want to highlight at the very top band there where it says there's this box and it says inventory and months of supply. And that's in the detached world. This has had the biggest shakeup, the biggest difference. And why I'm highlighting this section is because the numbers are largest. Now, where are they largest is in the inventory upswing. We're seeing inventory year over year has climbed about 32%. So that's a lot. What that's translated to now, because that, as I mentioned, the sales figure so far this year has been pretty slow. The months of supply has almost doubled since this time last year, where we had under 2 months of supply last year in the detached market. Now we're seeing almost 4. So when you see big numbers, those are the ones I want to point out, and those are the things that are obviously changing that we need to keep our eye on. Now, if I scroll down a little bit further, I'll talk about the apartment segment. Now, month after month, I think for the last 14 or 15 months since I've been doing this, you will see that I've talked somewhat negatively about where the apartment segment has been. This is not changing, But the sweet spot, the good thing about this is that you probably can't see it, but it will show you that it's the only segment out of these three that has seen less inventory this time coming to market as was last year. So that's a great news story. It's not going to change things that much in the apartment segment. It's not going to make it get better, but thank goodness we're having that happen, so it's not going to get worse. All right, so that's enough about those things. So another thing that we're seeing now, I talked about inventory being higher, but there's a good news story with this inventory that's keeping us at bay. So if you pull up the new listing graph, Dave, this one will show you something that is actually very welcomed, right? We've seen inventory be higher than we want to see, but the good news around all this, new listings that have been coming to market, we're below. So if you look at this graph on the right-hand side, we're the far right column, and we're below pretty much everything other than 1 year as far as new listings that have come to market year to date. So thank goodness for that as well. We're seeing that there hasn't been this instant ramp up in this early spring market that could affect us and potentially, push pricing downward. That's not happening yet. So that is a good news story among the story of high inventory. Now, the flip side, so that was the new listing side. If we go to the total inventory graph, it'll tell us that if new listings was the only thing we counted, we'd be looking pretty good. But because the total inventory graph shows kind of the leftover properties that haven't sold are still around, and that is accounting to this graph, and it's showing it we're on the high side. So this graph goes up and down, but it's only, again, that red line that I want you guys to look to. You're seeing that it's right on the top end of things. And despite low new listings coming to market, we just had too much coming across from the winter months that is giving us this high inventory price, environment. So that's something we're gonna watch and watch closely. Now, one thing to note, when we talk about these stats, it's mostly about a macro, meaning it's the overall, it's the overarching things that's happening. But all of us as realtors that might be listening, or all of us as consumers or people looking to buy, sell, that are inquiring about what's going on, we need to look way tighter to these micro markets. And when I say that, it's broken down to types of property, areas of the city, and then as well as price ranges, because they will always change. So I'm going to queue up a very basic graph that I have that I use the Krebs stats, and I go a little deeper on, that will talk about where we sit when it comes to different price ranges in the city. That one. So again, don't put on your glasses and trying to see these numbers other than the band of green. So this band of green is telling us that despite sales being down and inventory being up, and us having a bit of cause for concern that, what could happen, the highlight, the success part of the market so far is the luxury price ranges. You will see from $1 million all the way up, other than just a small blip in the middle, which is probably just circumstance. We're seeing actually massive gains in sales over last year. So it is that luxury band that is doing really, really well. Now, why is this? Well, because these are the price brackets where we're seeing the most positive activity, it's the luxury buyers are less affected by the economy. They're less affected by the changes to mortgage rules that has already happened. So I would suggest why this is happening is because when the government wanted to slow down the national housing market because of some of the markets like Vancouver and Toronto just flying, they made these changes, but they didn't think about them for the average Canadian homeowner or less. They wanted to slow it down because there was a lot of money being brought into our country, and the feds made this change without thinking that it's actually going to impact the average home buyer. The average home buyer is who fuels our economy, right? And who fuels our economy forward in our housing sector. And they made a decision that I believe was incorrect. And that's why we're seeing, hey, it's not even affecting the people that they might have wanted to slow down. It's affecting everybody else. And that's why people are having a harder time moving forward and making those purchases, even despite the Canadian overall economy doing a little bit better than they'd expected. So yeah, that's information for you. If you have specific questions about specific price ranges and locations, we want to hear from you, because there's no way in a small market update like this could we go over enough of it. And I would really suggest that you reach out to your agent and have them dive into that local specific market for you, so that you can find out if where you're looking, if the price ranges you're buying in, or if a seller, what you're selling into, where are you on this spectrum? Because there is a lot of differences going on. Now, one of the segments I talk about is kind of a buyer segment, a seller segment, and then just the general homeowner. And I'm going to hit the buyer side just a little bit here. So things to note on the buyer. The pendulum right now is fully in your favor. So it's a great time to get off the fence, right? If you've been humming and hawing, or if you've been struggling to get the financing approved because of the changes, I want you to jump in, because there's some great deals that are happening right now before this busy season is upon us. Another thing to note for you is your areas are very, like I said before, is very priced. The areas and the locations and the property type, it's very dependent. They're going to change a lot. So I don't want you to leave this little update, if you're a buyer out there listening, thinking that everywhere has deals to be had. Because from a macro perspective, it may look like that. But from the micro perspective for where you're looking to buy, it could be completely different. And you just need to, I would just say, ensure your realtor has a strong pulse on the market of interest that you're working and buying in or selling in, so that they can set your expectation properly, and so that you don't have one that's kind of misaligned with the micro market that you're looking at. There is just too much. And we know that buying is a big time emotional decision. And what keeps emotion in check is knowing the proper facts. Now, the seller side, what are we going to do when it comes to talk about on the selling side? I've been singing this same tune month in, month out for quite some time, but patience is the game. I talked to you about the supply and demand equation being a little bit out of line, but prices are holding despite that. So what has happened is Calgarians and area are very resilient. We've proven that we're not looking to make price changes, and no one's overly motivated to drop that price down, so they're holding steady. But what has changed is that days on market has really shifted. It's crept up in a big way, and like I said, almost 100% in some cases, difference than this time last year. So I want you to understand this, that patience is the game. Remember, there's 3 reasons that a home doesn't sell. Your agent's marketing is step 1. Step 2 is the condition of your home. This is where you come in as a seller. This is where you can create the most impact and help beat the market. So work hard on the things that you can control. And then the third one is obviously price, right? So if you're unwilling to make those that home condition differences, sprucing up the home, fixing things, if you're unwilling to do that or unable to, you got to really watch on the price, because as I showed you, the inventory is very high and the buyer's activity is still very low. So you're going to have to be mindful of that. And then in general, for the greater Calgarian, who are homeowners, what does all this mean to you? And it simply means that yes, despite the market trying to rebound and trying to provide some positive uptick, it's just simply not happening right now. The inventory is too high. So just expect, again, probably year over year, we're not going to see a lot of changes. You don't have any stresses or worry. If you're planning a future transition, upside, downside, whatever it might be, just again, plan for flat. All right. Beyond that, I want to dig into, I go into a segment that talks about which areas of the city and districts are hot. There's so much to talk about, and there's such a variety that I'm not going to dig much into this, but I do want to show you this graph so you know that we have information about this as realtors, and we can dig into this to let you know that, whether you're northwest or southwest or southeast or south, and you're a detached homeowner or an apartment homeowner, that everything is changing in a huge way. You will see on this graph from the 8 districts, city center and northeast, it'll adjust 10, 15, 20% from district to district. So if you're thinking, you know what, Darren told me that months of supply on average are 6 months, that only might mean that for, one of 3 or 4 of the 24 district combinations here. So again, just know that we've got the information here, and I just want you to be very, very cognizant of the fact that it's just so different from area to area. And then when I look outside of Calgary to the satellite communities around us, it even changes even more. So again, this market update just simply can't cover all of that. And just know, if you are a Northwest home seller and you're an apartment seller, you're going to have a completely different number on all of this stuff than the others. And we're going to need to make a plan specific to you. All right. So that's where I want to leave that part, because it's just, again, I don't want to bore you with numbers. But if I were to hit you with, I guess some of people's most favorite things is the hottest communities. What are things, where are communities doing really well that I would like to point out? And I've got a few of them here to talk about. Now, in general, the market is nowhere near as hot as some of the months as it was last year. But a couple of the ones that are trading really well, both with really low months of supply and also having a good amount of sell through. So as new listings come to the market, a bunch of them sell. Abbeydale did extremely well. It had 10 full sales last month, which is a really big month for it. And as far as the bigger communities, Mackenzie Lake, that is, again, its month of supply was extremely low, and it sold a whack of homes. So again, those communities doing very, very well as of last month. A couple others to note that also stood out, that were either low on days, a month of supply, or just low in, or had a really quick pace as far how things were turning. Willow Park down in the south. Christie Park, it keeps popping up there. It's a very sought after community, and it's doing well. Thorncliffe up in the north. And then again, back down to the south was Woodlands, and the southeast into Douglasdale. So there's about, these are the highlight 7 communities that I feel, based on all the metrics I'm looking at, are not struggling at all. Like, these are great places to be selling from. And if you're buying, you just need to be very aware that you got to act quick, right? So that's where I'm talking about these microclimates. They're very important to note. So that's about it for me today. It's a bit of a longer episode, I think, than the previous months, but I hope it provided some value. And I thank you for taking the time to listen in and getting these updates once again. As always, like I said, this is way more detailed than what I can do in a period of time that you may or may not be listening to the whole thing. So reach out to your agent. These guys at Redline, our agents, are fairly highly trained on this information. I'd be more than happy to dig into this as you need it. And then the funnest thing of all coming is that we've got a big new office opening that we can't wait to have you guys all into. So look for a series of grand openings that we're going to be doing in the month of May. But other than that, thanks again for tuning in on a Friday afternoon. And if you're watching this on replay, then again, thank you very much as well.